Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm John Tucker.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, we begin with the latest developments in the Middle East. President Biden looks to deter Israel from any attack that includes Iran's nuclear sites as the country seeks retaliation for Iran's recent missile barrage. Let's get the very latest from Bloomberg's Ed Baxter.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed a powerful retribution attack and is getting pressure from some Israeli politicians to really ramp it up. President Biden asked whether he would support that.
The answer is no. I think there's things we'll be discussing with the Israelis what they're going to do, but all seven of us agree that they have a right to respond.
He says all members of the G7 would prefer that it come in the form of sanctions first. The comments are meant to rein in Israel, something that has not been successful in the past. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ed, thanks. Well, as Israel's government considers when and how it might strike Iran, Bloomberg's Dana Kraish says it's unclear what type of response Israeli officials are discussing.
But what we know is that there are several targets that they can go after, right? You have the oil installations, you have Iranian leaders in some covert operation. Israelis did prove they can reach Tehran when they killed Ismail Haniyeh right there. But what is clear is that Israel has committed itself to this retaliation. And now we're yet again in the region on edge as we wait for that, of course.
Bloomberg's Dana Kraish says overnight, Israel bombed Lebanon's capital of Beirut. It comes after 8 of its soldiers were killed fighting in southern Lebanon, where it's engaged with a conflict with the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah.
And all the while, Karen, the possibility of a wider Middle East conflict extending oil's rally. Oil options show investors betting prices will rise further. As we check crude right now, Brent crude, the international benchmark, up about 0.8% at $74.51 a barrel.
Well, John, President Biden's also managing crises back at home. The president's ratcheting up pressure on U.S. port employers and shipping lines to restart talks with striking dock workers. Biden's warning of dire consequences of a prolonged work stoppage.
This natural disaster is incredibly consequential. The last thing we need on top of that is a man-made disaster, what's going on at the ports. We're getting pushback already, and we're hearing from the folks regionally that they're having trouble getting product they need because of the port strike.
President Biden's backed the position of the International Longshoremen Association, saying cargo handlers deserve a larger share of profits. Both 2024 presidential candidates, Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris, also blamed shipping companies.
And President Biden's also managing the federal response to damage inflicted by Hurricane Helene. Biden and Harris separately toured the southeast region of the U.S., the president traveling to the Carolinas and will visit Florida and Georgia today. Vice President Harris will visit North Carolina. Donald Trump visited Georgia and criticized Harris and Biden's response, but Republican governors whose states were affected have actually praised the administration's response so far.
Meanwhile, John, in the nation's capital, the Justice Department's filed a comprehensive narrative arguing that Donald Trump should face prosecution for his efforts to overturn the 2020 election, regardless of the Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity. And Bloomberg's Amy Morris has more from Washington.
It is a 165-page document. It has some redactions. In it, prosecutors argue that Trump should not be protected by presidential immunity because he engaged in, quote, criminal conduct as a private citizen when he and co-conspirators pursued multiple criminal means to disrupt the 2020 presidential election. Prosecutors say they would call swing state election officials to testify about the falsity of Trump's fraud claims, and they would introduce the contents of Trump's iPhone and tweets that the government contends were unofficial from Trump's account. Trump's lawyers have until October 17th to respond. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, thanks, Amy. Turning to tech now, an historic round of funding for OpenAI. Bloomberg's Annabelle Druller says the artificial intelligence giant raised $6.6 billion in its latest funding round, making it one of the largest venture-backed startups in the world.
You're talking on putting it alongside SpaceX, for instance, TikTok owner ByteDance. But the tech industry really believes in the power of AI. So it was led by the latest round by Thrive Capital. They tipped in around $1.3 billion. Microsoft, we're hearing, which is the biggest backer to date, about $750 million.
Bloomberg's Annabelle Driller says the funding round values the company at $157 billion. OpenAI says it will use the cash to drive forward AI research and increase computing capacity.
Well, John, we turn to markets now, and global equities are on course for their first weekly loss over the past 4 weeks amid geopolitical uncertainty and unclear signals from Fed officials about interest rate cuts. Traders are digesting recent comments from Richmond Fed President Thomas Barkin, who noted progress on inflation, but says the Fed can't declare victory just yet. It comes as investors anticipate a critical data point tomorrow, the September jobs report, which could give clarity as to whether the labor market is weakening and the Fed needs to ease further.
Still, a lot of traders remain bullish, Karen. Goldman Sachs Managing Director Scott Rubner wrote in a note to clients that he believes a U.S. equity rally will take off at the end of October and worries his high-end S&P target of 6,000 year-end might be too low. Phil Palumbo with Palumbo Wealth Management tells Bloomberg there's 2 reasons why stocks could rally through this year.
Number one, the Fed is now accommodative. A lot of people are trying to guess 25 basis points, 50 basis points this year, 100, 200 next year. That's really a waste of time. The only thing that we really need to understand is the Fed is being accommodative. And then earnings are anticipated to grow about 9% this year, next year 12 to 13. Those are reasons why you want to be positive on the equity market. You just have to watch the consumer.
Phil Palumbo with Palumbo Wealth Management also expects the market to broaden out with stocks outside the Magnificent Seven growing over the next couple of years.
Well, interest rates are also in focus in Europe, John, following comments from Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey. And Bloomberg's Ewan Potts joins us from London with the latest. Good morning, Ewan.
Karen and John, traders this morning adding to bets on more rate cuts from the Bank of England. Speaking to the Guardian newspaper, Governor Andrew Bailey said he was encouraged by price pressures not being as persistent as feared. Bailey said the UK Central Bank could become, quote, a little bit more aggressive and a bit more activist in its approach to cutting interest rates. The pound sliding on the comments. In London, I'm Ewan Potts, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, thanks, Ewan. And finally, a note from the sports world. Miami Dolphins owner Stephen Ross in advanced talks with private equity firm Aris Management and billionaire Joe Tsai to sell stakes in the NFL team and other assets. People familiar with the matter telling Bloomberg it could be valued at $8.1 billion. Well, sources add that as part of the agreement, Aris will purchase a 10% stake in the properties, including Hard Rock Stadium and F1's Miami Grand Prix.
It is time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Security is tight around temples across the country as Jewish communities gather for Rosh Hashanah. In Pittsburgh, Director of Community Security for the Jewish Federation, Sean Brokos, says they're always on heightened alert during the holidays, but this year is different, coming off the October 7th terror attacks and the daily exchange of missiles in the Middle East.
We are in a heightened threat environment. We've seen that here in the city, and we have had a lot more extensive planning and preparation with our law enforcement partners and community leaders.
In New York City, the NYPD is beefing up patrols around synagogues as well. A manslaughter trial begins today for Daniel Penny, the white Marine veteran who choked Jordan Neely to death on a New York City subway car. Neely's family says the black 30-year-old was homeless and facing mental health struggles. Penny's team says Neely was aggressively threatening and that Penny was simply acting to protect himself. Last year's deadly wildfire on Maui was caused by a downed utility pole that firefighters thought they had extinguished. That's the determination of a report released by the Maui Fire Department and the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. ATF Special Agent in Charge, Jonathan Blaze, says his agency is classifying the fire as accidental.
Because of an undetected smoldering event or rekindling, the fire reignited in the afternoon, causing extreme devastation.
The wind-whipped fire decimated the historic town of Lahaina in August of 2023 and killed more than 100 people. A Black Texas high school student who was suspended over his hairstyle is back in federal court, hoping he can return to his school. 18-year-old Daryl George hopes a federal judge will allow him to return to classes at Barbers Hill High School east of Houston. He faced suspension last year and this year due to the length of his dreadlocks, a violation of the dress code. George's lawyer, Allie Booker, challenged the school's policy regarding hair length.
You're going to have to show us studies that show that men whose hair grows below their eyebrows do not learn at the same rate as females who have hair that's below the eyebrows.
Lawyer Allie Booker says the controversy took an emotional toll on George. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Report. It's brought to you by Tri-State Audi. And here's John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. 4 game twos in the wild card round. In 3 of the 4, the team that won the opening game finished the series, but not the Mets. In Milwaukee, they led 3-1, 3-2 in the 8th inning. They brought in Phil Maton. He was working for the 4th time in 5 days. He gave up a game-tying home run to Jackson Churio, who had also homered earlier. And 2 outs later, Garrett Mitchell, a pinch hit 2-run shot, also off Maton. Milwaukee won 5-3. Here was Maton after the loss.
It's extremely frustrating. Would have rather given that up in the regular season game. But again, just went over, looking over the iPad, looking at the pitches. Overall, pretty happy with my pitch selection, execution. A little bit too much play with some of them, but I think it's just one of those situations where they just beat me today. And it's a little easier to rest on that, but ultimately we have to take care of business tomorrow and respond.
Jose Quintana, who's pitched very well of late, will start for the Mets tonight. Winner advances to play Philadelphia. Padres beat the Braves 5-4, scored all 5 in the second inning. Manny Machado, 2-run double, and then a 2-run triple by Jackson Merrill, so it'll be an all SoCal NLDS. Padres and Dodgers, the Royals, who took game 1 1-0, won game 2 2-1 in Baltimore. Second straight year the Orioles got swept in the wild card round. The Tigers got a pinch hit 3-run double from Andy Ibanez, 8th inning for a 5-2 win at Houston. That ends the Astros streak of 7 straight years going to the ALCS. So in the ALDS, Royals against the Yankees. Game 1 Saturday night in the Bronx. The Tigers now play Cleveland. NFL Week 5 against tonight. NFC South, Bucks and Falcons in Atlanta. The Jets play the 4-0 Vikings. Sunday in London, the Giants going the other direction. They'll be in Seattle. Malik Neighbors, the Giants' rookie wideout sensation, did not practice yesterday. He's in concussion protocol. That blockbuster Knicks trade now official. Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo to Minnesota for Karl Anthony Towns. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Karen and John.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
And good morning, 5:14 on Wall Street. I'm John Tucker. Israel's warplanes bombed Beirut overnight after 8 of its soldiers were killed in southern Lebanon. The Israeli government, meantime, yet to retaliate for Iran's barrage of missiles Tuesday evening. Let's find out more this morning, and I'm happy to say we're joined by Bloomberg News Middle East correspondent Jumana Bersachi in Dubai. Good to talk to you. Let's begin with what happened in Beirut overnight. Give us some of the specifics.
Yeah, that's right. So this is actually the most active front in the context of the broader regional conflict that's going on here. And we know since the beginning of the week that Israel has started these ground incursions on the southern border of Lebanon. They have said that they are conducting targeted ground raids. Now, alongside that, airstrikes have continued amongst in areas around the suburbs of Beirut, the eastern Bekaa, which is close to the Syrian border. More fatalities have been recorded overnight, and it seems as though 8 Israeli soldiers were killed in clashes with Hezbollah. 3 of those officers were captains. This was announced by the IDF overnight, and then this morning also hearing of more than a dozen Hezbollah fighters who were killed as well. So what we're seeing in Lebanon right now is conflict on the ground, but then a continuation of the airstrikes that started last week, and all of this is part and parcel of the new war objective that Israel introduced 2 weeks ago now, and saying that it was necessary for them to conduct this mission in order to dislodge Hezbollah from South Lebanon and to allow residents of the north to return home.
Is Israel absolutely committed to retaliation for the ballistic missile attack from Iran?
It most certainly is committed to the retaliation. It's a question of when. And if you listen to all of the political voices across all sides of the spectrum in Israel, everyone is calling for the need to retaliate. Now, the question is, what is the reprisal going to look like? A couple of options being discussed. And of course, we're not privy to this information. This is just estimates based on conversations that we've had. It could take several forms. It could be of the form of targeting military infrastructure, similar to what they did back in April, but then it was a very targeted strike hitting an air battery defense system. To take it one step further, there could be more targeted strikes on individuals. And you will recall Ismail Haniyeh was killed in Tehran. Of course, Israel never accepted responsibility for that, but there could be more covert operations. And then what other people have been talking about as well is potential strikes on energy infrastructure, which of course would send big shockwaves through the oil market. But here as well, if they wanted to be precise, Israel could target processing facilities, which would be which produce gasoline that's mainly intended for the domestic market. Here we're talking about anything between 300,000 to 400,000 barrels per day. So the global impact of that wouldn't be as large as taking out Iran's full export capacity. And then the final, and if I say nuclear option, is quite literally the nuclear option, is where Israel would target Iran's nuclear sites, but the U.S. have expressed deep reservations about them doing that.
And just real quick, those nuclear sites, the enrichment sites, would be difficult targets because they're basically under mountains, are they not?
That's exactly it. And so there are questions about whether even Israel's military has the ability to sustain lasting damage on some of these military sites, and whether they can actually do it unilaterally without the help of the U.S., which is why the U.S. support in this response is going to be vital. But at the same time, there's an election coming up, and you would want to think that President Biden wants that on his legacy.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
I'm John Tucker. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.